All right, welcome to Americans for Truth Live. We apologize for being a few minutes late. We ran into a problem with our YouTube live stream. Given the way things are going, it's probably because we're being censored. Somebody's monkeying around over there at Google with our live streaming power. We help a number of clients, and this is not uncommon. We've got some clients that have actually been censored because they're Christians on YouTube. And so we'll be looking into that, and tomorrow we'll be on time. We are on Facebook Live and Periscope right now, and we're on AmericansForTruth.com all the time. And Peter is with us. We're not going to be able to see his handsome face today because he's on by phone, and I'll let him tell you why. Peter, it's all yours.
Oh, hey, Mike. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm off today. I just had a skin. I got this had skin cancer treatments, and I had one on my face, and I got a big bandage, and I'm kind of numb, so I prefer to go by phone today. But real excited about the show, Mike. We've got Cliff Kincaid there, who's one of my heroes in the conservative movement. Cliff is a longtime journalist. He's got a group called America Survival. Cliff, welcome.
Pete, great to be with you. Sorry to hear about your becoming Scarface.
Well, yeah, you know, the good looks going down the tubes. What can I say? Anyways, Cliff's interviewed me so many times, but now that I'm interviewing Cliff, I get to brag about you, Cliff. You can't do anything about it. Cliff is really, I think, a hero in the movement because he just is so principled. And I really think few people are as principled as Cliff Kincaid. And let's look at what he does. He really is about conservative truth. He's not one of these guys who sucks up to the establishment, certainly doesn't suck up to the Republican Party. He commits the sin these days of not sucking up to Fox News, which is why he'll probably never be interviewed by Fox News again. But I really admire Cliff because, we worked together at Accuracy Media for the great Reed Irvine, and we've been friends a long time. We both wrote about communism. Cliff's written done a lot more against the communism movement than I have, but that's where I got my start, Cliff. And I'm proud to say that when I went to Nicaragua, remember that, Cliff, against the Sandinistas, I was one of the few people who, and you probably did as well, predicted that the Marxist Sandinista regime was going to lose that election. Remember that? Was that back 1999, Cliff?
It's hard to go back in history. The sad news is, of course, the Sandinistas are back in power.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was 1990. Yeah, the Sandinistas are back in power. But anyways, Cliff is he's fearless, and sometimes I actually get shamed by him because we'll talk about it, but he was the only one in the conservative movement, virtually, the only leader who was like, hey, Kavanaugh is not all he's cracked up to be. Cliff was writing against Kavanaugh and bringing some stuff out. And I think most people now, I've been talking to some pro-lifers, most people agree that regardless of where Kavanaugh ends up on the life issue, and I would be ecstatic if he overturned Roe, although I don't think he or Roberts will probably vote to overturn Roe. So we don't know when or if that will happen, but most people agree, and Cliff was one of the few people bringing this out, and I wish I would have brought it out more. This is Brett Kavanaugh. Of course, there was the big, the controversy that erupted with him because of some of the actions of the left. But Cliff was really the only one, or one of the few people anyway, saying, look, this guy praised Kennedy, Justice Anthony Kennedy, who, of course, on the court was the gay activist, right, Cliff? And, Kavanaugh came into the proceedings praising Kennedy, which probably indicates that it would be a shocker to me if he voted against the homosexual agenda. He might vote for some religious liberty things, but in terms of homosexual so-called marriage, etc., Cliff was one of the few people bringing out that, look, this guy was praising Kennedy, and Justice Kennedy became the gay activist on the court, right, Cliff?
Pete, it was not only that. That was all done out in the open, if you remember, when Kavanaugh was nominated by President Trump. He praised Anthony Kennedy for his, quote, legacy of liberty. even though Kennedy was the one who handed down not only the gay rights decision on so-called gay marriage, but also upheld Roe v. Wade. That's a legacy of liberty. We pointed that out. That was done out in the open. But one of the things we did was go back into his history. And you brought up the fact that I worked for Reed Irvine, and so did you. I worked with Reed Irvine on the fact that when Brett Kavanaugh was a young prosecutor in the Office of Independent Counsel headed by Ken Starr, that Kavanaugh helped cover up the murder of Vincent Foster, who was the deputy White House counsel under Bill Clinton. We brought all of that up. I did a major report. We did several shows about this, but we tried to do our best. But of course, we were overwhelmed by the power and influence of groups like the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, which had recommended Kavanaugh.
And just a little background, Cliff, that when what Reed Irvine uncovered, and Reed was just dogged because that's the way he was, and I think both of us try to emulate his example in terms of just being dogged for the truth. Reed uncovered that basically there was some key facts in that Vince Foster case. For example, well, I don't want to get into all that right now, Cliff. Maybe you can summarize it better than I can, but Kavanaugh sort of Reed got a chance to actually interview Kavanaugh on the phone, which you put in your report, and there was obviously some malfeasance going on in that investigation. It's pretty wild. You'll never hear any of this in the mainstream media, Cliff, but that's what you do. You report a lot of information which is not reported by even mainstream conservatives.
All of this information was embarrassing to the conservative movement, which wanted to overlook it, move on. Of course, the Federalist Society and Heritage recommended Kavanaugh. Suffice it to say, the official line was, of course, that Vince Foster was despondent, had psychiatric problems, drove himself to Fort Marcy Park outside of Washington, D.C., and blew his brains out, killed himself in a suicide. It wasn't true. Now, interestingly enough, we produced evidence to show it wasn't true, couldn't have been true. But we also found out during our investigations of Kavanaugh, we found an old photo, interestingly enough, of Ken Starr's independent counsel team way back when Kavanaugh was a young prosecutor. And there were a bunch of them sitting in a family room, a living room of some kind, many of them sitting on a sofa. And who was on the sofa along with Brett Kavanaugh and Ken Starr? Well, a guy named Rod Rosenstein. Remember him? He's still the Deputy Attorney General of the United States today. He's responsible for the Russiagate prosecutor Robert Mueller, still to this day going after President Trump. So I guess what I'm saying, Pete, is that only if you look into these things, go behind the scenes, behind the curtains, do you understand what exactly the deep state is, who belongs to it, and how they manipulate both parties, even President Trump, behind the scenes.
Right, and you mentioned liberty, Cliff. I think this is a huge point. We don't have total liberty on the homosexual issue. You brought up a good point about abortion. What about the liberty of unborn babies? What about the right to live? Of course, that's the most egregious thing. But Cliff, you go back to, I think, one of the first, if not the first, and it may be the first gay rights decision Kennedy authored. I hope I'm not wrong on this, but the Romer v. Evans case in Colorado essentially precluded the right of citizens to organize against the homosexual agenda. That was the one, Amendment 2, where the citizens of Colorado, said, look, we don't like these so-called non-discrimination sexual orientation laws. They're going to be used to promote special rights for homosexuals at the expense of other people's rights, which is exactly what happened with non-discrimination laws all across the country, if not the world, actually. And so the people of Colorado said, look, we're going to pass this amendment, which basically precludes the passage of these amendments or these non-discrimination laws in various cities in Colorado. That amendment passed against all odds. They were outspent, of course, by the left, as always conservatives are outspent. Cliff, they won that vote. But then the decision in Romer v. Evans, which I believe Kennedy authored, struck that down, which basically now means you cannot organize. You don't have the freedom to pass a statewide bill because they'll say that violates a class of people based on sexual orientation.
Pete, conservatives have been burned by a number of Supreme Court justices. Anthony Kennedy, yeah, he authored the gay rights decisions. There's been others, Sandra Day O'Connor. So many times conservatives have been burned by these nominees offered up by the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation. And now what's happened recently, I saw a Bloomberg story the other day about how John Roberts, supposedly a conservative, now the Chief Justice of the United States, who increasingly is siding with the liberals. We've been burned so many times because people on our side in the conservative media don't do their homework. They don't investigate this. They just accept whatever the Republican Party gives them. And let's keep in mind that Ken Starr, who of course supervised Brett Kavanaugh and the cover-up of the murder of Vincent Foster, was also the head of Baylor University when it came out there were a bunch of sexual assault scandals by the football team. That they forced Ken Starr out of Baylor because of that. And now Ken Starr, though, is a favorite talking head in the media, especially on Fox News.
Yeah, now let's get to that, Cliff, because and this is why, and I'm sorry to lap the praise on you, Cliff, but what the heck, you don't get praised by many conservatives, so I'm going to do it. You took on Fox News. You had me write a paper. It's actually like half a book, and I kind of want to finish it and just write a total book now because it's gotten a lot worse since, Cliff. But you're one of the few people who actually said, hey, look, I'm not going to worship at the feet of Fox News. And I could tell you stories, Cliff, I'm sure you've heard more than I have, of conservatives who refuse to criticize Fox News because they don't want to ever be not invited again on Fox News. So Fox News really has incredible power in the conservative movement. They set the agenda, and unfortunately, one of the agendas they've latched onto is the homosexual activist agenda. And you had me write a paper. It's on our website. It's also on Cliff's website. Cliff, what's your website?
They can go to usasurvival.org, and then that redirects you. That's our parent homepage. It also can go to americasurvival.org. You'll find Pete's report down there. We are redoing our website. We're moving things around. And don't forget, Pete, I should mention this too, the book you helped us write on Barack Hussein Obama, entitled Permanent Revolution. You can see at the bottom there, Pete contributed a chapter. This looks at the phenomenon known as cultural Marxism, how it was implemented by the Obama administration, and how we're still 2 years into the Trump presidency trying to dig ourselves out of that mess. But you're right, Fox News is a big part of the left-wing cultural Marxist agenda. You don't find anybody on Fox anymore who's critical of the left-wing cultural Marxist homosexual agenda. In fact, to the contrary, you find open homosexuals like Tammy Bruce, who's a noted lesbian, or Guy Benson, who's an out-of-the-closet, quote, conservative gay. They're trying to confuse people.
We had last night was Mark Levin interviewed the guy who does the walk away movement. He's a homosexual, open homosexual, and talk about walk away. One person you'll never see on Fox News is somebody who's walked away from the homosexual lifestyle. I mean, this is one of the great stories in the culture war that's never told. They'll have Shep Smith on there, who we both know is a snarky leftist, at least on social issues, actually on a number of issues, it seems to me, Cliff, Shep Smith, but yet he's protected. He's got a key spot there. And yet you will not have the people who we've brought out already on our show, people like Stephen, my good friend Stephen Black, people, all sorts of ex-gay, Charlene Cothran, ex-lesbians. They'll never be on Fox News because it seems to me that there's an unwritten rule, Cliff. Maybe it's formalized now at Fox. There's no real strong criticism allowed of the homosexual movement on Fox. Is that an overstatement or is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. And then, of course, we got Tammy Bruce, Guy Benson, Shepard Smith, who's an open homosexual, he's actually an anchor. He's paid millions of dollars a year. And as you say, he has this left-wing rhetoric featured on his show coming out of his own mouth. I remember one case where he attacked a Christian clerk in Kentucky who refused to sign marriage licenses for homosexuals. And then, of course, we can't forget to mention, Pete, this is big. You and I went up to New York together on one of these occasions where we documented what was going on at the Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association in New York, where Fox News and Fox Business Network were both official sponsors of what amounted to a gay rights rally by the media. And Fox News and Fox Business have contributed tens of thousands of dollars deliberately to furthering the gay rights agenda in the media.
Okay, Cliff, so let's segue from there. Here's where I see the whole conservative movement going, and I think this is very bad for morality. It's all about the gay conservatives now, so-called, Cliff, and you've written on this, and I want you to talk to the issue. But, you know, the gay conservatives, and that's what Mark Levin had on yesterday, and over and over and over again. And what is the problem, one of the biggest problem with you know, endorsing the gay conservative movement, so-called, Cliff, is that, look, God doesn't give a pass for homosexuality if you've got an R next to it. It's not like if you open up the New Testament, Romans 1, and it says, you know, it talks about homosexual behavior there, you know, being, and in other chapters in the Bible, the Old Testament talks about the abomination. You're Catholic, Cliff, it talks about an intrinsically disordered lifestyle behavior. It's not like in these scriptures and these doctrinal statements that it says, oh, but if you're a Republican, then it's acceptable to God. And so what happens is Republican homosexuality actually is a huge, it's like Nixon going to China, remember? I mean, it's a huge way to normalize homosexuality to moderates and conservatives, and that's exactly what's happening, Cliff. Now you see lots of Republicans openly out there saying, I support gay marriage, so-called, in the name of being a conservative. And these libertarians, and you see this huge movement now trying to normalize homosexuality in the so-called conservative movement.
Billionaires such as Paul Singer and the Koch brothers are financing this push. Paul Singer himself is a big GOP donor with a gay son. I don't know really what motivates the Koch brothers except their, quote, libertarianism. My point all along, Pete, has been, as much as I object to it, if you want to be a homosexual, if you want to pursue that lifestyle in private, there's nothing I can do about it, but just don't call yourself a conservative. It's totally inconsistent with conservatism. It's totally inconsistent, frankly, with Catholicism. And you see what's happened with the Catholic Church, with the lavender or the gay mafia really being exposed by conservative Catholics now who want them purged. The Catholic Church is in a total meltdown over the infiltration. And in the same way, the conservative movement has been infiltrated not only by the so-called gays, but by the communists themselves. We saw at the CPAC this week. Here's my press pass. I actually got into this CPAC. They gave me a press pass, even though they denied me a press pass last year. And one of the featured speakers at this year's conservative, remember that, Conservative Political Action Conference, was the Marxist Van Jones, big recipient of Soros money, on the topic of emptying the prisons in the name of criminal justice reform. This is what's happened to the, quote, conservative movement. Of course, the whole conference was presided over by the head of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp, who's a D.C. lobbyist. His wife works for President Trump. And President Trump, let's don't let him off the hook. He appointed and nominated a, quote, gay ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, who's now using the power and influence of his position to use the resources of the State Department to promote homosexuality on a global basis in the name of the United States, and we shouldn't stand for it.
Right, and Cliff, that's exactly what Obama did, and Grinnell's doing what a lot of homosexual activists do. They might call themselves conservative, Republican, but they will use their power. Their first allegiance, it seems to me, Cliff, is towards the homosexual activist movement. And so you've got Grinnell. You're exactly right. He's out there doing, this is the Obama, what Obama did. Obama was the one flying the rainbow flags at embassies across the world. Now you've got Grinnell saying he's going to come in and he's going to work against any country that so-called criminalizes homosexuality. Well, here's the problem, Cliff. I spoke in Jamaica. There's a poll in Jamaica. They have a thing called the Buggery Law. Buggery is an English term for anti-sodomy, for sodomy. So they have an anti-Buggery law in Jamaica. 91%, a few years ago in a poll, Cliff, 91% of the Jamaican people supported that law. And the people, the leaders in the pro-family movement in Jamaica, and I'm thinking of a great guy named Dr. Wayne West and others, they know that the first leg of the homosexual agenda in this incremental revolution that we've experienced in the United States and the UK and Canada in the West, taking down the sodomy law is the first step in this massive revolution, which we're now seeing in the United States, which is wreaking havoc, which is you now have underage girls having their healthy breasts removed. This happened in Chicago, a 16-year-old girl, believe it or not, in the name of the transgender revolution, which is attached at the hip to the gay revolution. A 16-year-old girl in Chicago had her healthy breasts removed so she could have a flat chest like a man. Cliff, people in other countries don't want this revolution, and now we have a Republican administration pushing this on the world.
It's a tragedy, and people have to understand what's going on. I support a lot of what President Trump is doing domestically and globally, but on this issue, he has truly fallen down on the job. Let's face it, he doesn't have, and I've been around, Pete, for a long time. I was going to CPAC when President Ronald Reagan spoke to the event. It's really deteriorated over the years. Trump came into office as a businessman making deals. He doesn't have the understanding of communism that Ronald Reagan had. He doesn't understand the dangers posed by cultural Marxism. On our website, usasurvival.org, you can go down on the right side. You can see a Freedom of Information Act request of documents we got out of the FBI about a man named Harry Hay, who the gays themselves acknowledge was the founder of the modern gay rights movement in the United States. Harry Hay was a member of the Communist Party. Not only that, but he was an advocate of having sex with children. He actually marched in a NAMBLA parade, NAMBLA standing for the North American Man-Boy Love Association.
Well, it was a gay rights parade, I think, in Los Angeles, and he held a sign which said NAMBLA marches with me, or something to that effect. He defended a notorious pederasty group, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, defended their right to march in a gay pride parade. And Cliff, that's another thing you and I both have brought out. There are these connections, especially in the early homosexual activist movement. There are these connections to pedophilia. It's incredible that 50 years later, after Stonewall, we're in the 50th year of the Stonewall, which is romanticized as the Stonewall Revolution, the gay liberation movement. But those early origins, Cliff, they actually allowed NAMBLA to march in some of their parades.
That's right, and of course, it's become a little uncomfortable and controversial to acknowledge this now on their part, but this is where it's all leading. After approving homosexuality and transgenderism, they're going down the road to pedophilia, just like Harry Hay had predicted. And here was a man, I call him a man, but there's even photos of Harry Hay wearing dresses.
He formed a group, or he was part of a group called the Radical Fairies.
The Radical Fairies. He was into the occult. This is a very dangerous movement. And as you pointed out earlier, Pete, we want to save these people. It's a lifestyle that's unnatural. It's not conservative. It's not Christian in any way. We should encourage them to get out of this lifestyle. Fox News should have the ex-homosexuals on the air so we can get the full truth out. But no, people like us, the ex-homosexuals and others who stand for truth, are being censored.
Absolutely, Cliff. And like I said, I mean, you've got Guy Benson, and I agree with Guy, and I'm sure you do on most issues, but he now calls himself a gay conservative and gay Christian. Now, you went through this in the Catholic Church, Cliff, and now it's happening in evangelicalism. You have a whole LGBTQ movement, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. They want to be recognized as a sexual minority in the Christian church. And so you've got Guy Benson saying, I'm a gay Christian. Well, what does that do? That undermines truth. And so you talk about walk away. How about Fox News gets behind the walk away from homosexuality movement? You talk about politically incorrect, Cliff. You're absolutely right. And yet, why is it that establishment conservatism would rather side with the homosexual movement than this wonderful, heartwarming movement of people who've left homosexuality?
Well, let me tell you, getting back to a point I made earlier, it's the money. You got billionaires like Paul Singer and the Koch brothers who are putting a lot of money into organizations that accept homosexuality, that even in the case of the Koch brothers, they're big on pushing acceptance and legalization of dope. That's another cause of theirs. Open borders, of course. They're not devoted in the least to cultural conservatism. And that always has been one of what Reagan called the three-legged stool. That is, what defines conservatism. You had economic conservatism, national defense, national security, and social and cultural issues. I mean, look at what's happened to the Boy Scouts of America. One of the proudest days in my life for me and my dad was when I became an Eagle Scout. That took a lot of work. And our motto was be morally straight, be prepared to be morally straight. And now they're going bankrupt. They've accepted girls. They've accepted homosexuals and homosexual scoutmasters. How is any of that consistent with being morally straight? Well, it's not. So they redefine everything.
It's the penetration and the takedown of institutions. And now they're gunning for conservatism and Christianity. You're absolutely right. I forgot you were an Eagle Scout. I mean, that was corporate America too. Remember Robert Gates? It was one of the guys, corporate titan, in an administration. I think Gates was in both the Obama and Bush administrations, right? Gates was right in on that, right. And other corporate titans. They took it down.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, this book that Pete contributed to, we published it through America's Survival Inc., is available at Amazon.com. It will go into, and many people think, oh, well, Obama's out of office. No, he's not. Did you know, Pete, that in 2017, his Obama Foundation, his presidential center, collected, I think it was over $100 million. I mean,
wow.
Worse than that, his legacy is still in effect, including in the armed forces. Now, President Trump, to his credit, has tried to reverse Obama's policy of accepting so-called transgenders. That's been tied up somewhat in the courts. I think Trump won a partial victory in the Supreme Court on that one. But he's sold out in so many ways. Again, we cite Richard Grenell. He ought to be fired. He ought to be fired for using his post as ambassador to Germany to use the resources of the State Department to promote cultural Marxism. And Trump,
Cliff, they're trying to say he's on his own, but the buck stops with Trump. And right. So conservatives hold Trump accountable. And Cliff, we're running out of time here, and we're going to go with tomorrow again with Cliff Kincaid, because he's really a national resource. But Cliff, I got to let you comment on this before we go, is the big thing Trump did also is immediately before he even took the oath of office, he came out and he said the gay marriage issue is over. He basically conceded to the Supreme Court in that unconstitutional decision, Obergefell v. Hodges. he conceded that. He basically said, okay, the Supreme Court has ruled, it's over on gay marriage. And that was devastating because we had 30 states plus, I think 32, which had defined marriage along natural lines between man and woman. And Trump basically said, hey, that's over.
And that was a big mistake by Trump. Again, he doesn't understand cultural Marxism. He doesn't even understand the history of the country. Back in the Revolutionary era, remember the guy named George Washington? He was General George Washington at the time, became our first president, the father of our country. The record is clear. You can look this up. He court-martialed a homosexual in the armed forces. He court-martialed him and expelled him from the Revolutionary Army when we needed everybody we could get to defeat the British. Those were the founders of our country. And slowly, day by day, week by week, the foundations of our country are being eroded by these anti-American movements.
Yeah, and we're going to come back with Cliff Kincaid. Cliff, I commend you for all your work, and I encourage people. I'm going to let Mike. I'm going to let you take it out for donating to AFTA, but I encourage people to go to Cliff's website, USA Survival, and support this guy. He's got more courage in his little pinky than most conservatives do in their whole body. I mean, he's out there fighting, and he doesn't care. He cares more about the truth, and that's why he doesn't get the establishment money that is going to go from the Koch. Well, the Koch brothers don't even support any. I mean, they're not social conservatives, and so they're actually working against us. And Cliff, before I forget, I'm going to remind you of this because I just saw this on Fox News. This has nothing to do with homosexuality, but I was stunned on Greg Gutfeld's show when they were talking about beyond legalizing marijuana. They were talking about legalizing magic mushrooms, and all of the people on the show supported, except for Dana Perino, and she was basically feckless. She basically said, "Well, if something's going to pass, if I try to recognize if something's going to pass." Dana Perino, the former spokeswoman for George Bush, I mean, she was the only one who objected, and she did a poor job of it. Can you imagine on Fox News supporting the legalization of psychedelic drugs now? I mean, what is this? This is crazy libertarianism. This has nothing to do with conservatism.
That's exactly right. And by the way, there's a section of this book, the section written by Tina Trent, on just that, how the plan is to go beyond just legalizing marijuana to cocaine and psychedelics, including LSD. Yes.
And so, folks, go to USA Survival. Help support Cliff Kincaid. Spread the word. He does a lot of videos. He does a lot of great journalism. I hope he's going to be at our rally at June 26th. We're going to be marking the 4th anniversary of the dreaded Obergefell v. Hodges decision. We're going to do a repeal Obergefell rally. Cliff, I hope you're there, but he will be with us again tomorrow at Americans for Truth Live. Mike, Heath, are you there? Can you take us out? And thanks, Cliff. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, Pete, I'm here. And thank you for viewing the show today. We're very grateful for Cliff's time. It's very precious. And your time is as well. Go to americansfortruth.com. It's on the screen behind me there, and you can see the donate button. I think Jared's going to throw it up also. Click on that donate button. Really simple to contribute. We'll take any size contribution, and we really, really do need your help because I can tell you this, the Koch brothers aren't writing us a check today. So, Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you, everybody. And remember, it's not our truth, it's God's truth. And it's our duty as Christians, as moral citizens of the United States of America, we've got to fight harder than the gay, bisexual, transgender, so-called queer activists do, defending their lives. We're defending the truth. So we do it, and we do it gladly. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Pete. Bye.